Hello and welcome to I Talk to Ghosts. I'm your haunted host, Jennifer, a spirit medium and a teller of ghost stories. Dear spooky listener, this weekend I am attending the Port Gamble Ghost Conference in Port Gamble, Washington, which is November 8th, 9th, and 10th. I will be having a live show at the podcast. I have a vendor booth with spooky swag, so come say hi if you're in the area. And I'm also teaching a class on building confidence in mediumship and intuition work. While I'm doing all these spooky activities, I'm going to leave the ghosts to keep you company. Please enjoy these ghost stories, and I will be back to mingle with you next week. I promise. Happy haunting! My sister and brother-in-law just had a baby and moved into a rental home. And I was asked to babysit my nephew one evening. I came over and my sister went over some details and mentioned she had a load of baby clothes in the dryer. She asked if I had time to take out the clothes and fold them. I agreed, and they left to enjoy their evening. A little while later, I heard that the dryer was done. So I scooped up my nephew and placed him in his crib. I went to the laundry room and took the clothes out and folded them. I placed all the clothes in a basket and placed the basket on the changing table. I took my sleeping nephew out of his crib and placed him in his bassinet in the living room. I watched TV quietly for a while until I heard a loud bang come from the nursery. I quietly made my way over to see what made the noise, and I opened the nursery door. The laundry basket I had placed on the changing table was now on the other side of the room, on the floor, upside down. The neatly folded baby clothes looked as though they had been tossed around. I quickly picked up the basket and the clothes and brought them back to the living room to refold. I was confused by the whole situation, but I didn't want to ruin my sister's night out. I decided not to even mention what happened. A few months went by, and my sister asked if I could babysit again. I agreed, and this time out, my mom had joined my sister and brother-in-law for dinner. My nephew had been napping prior to their departure, and my sister said he would need to be fed when he woke up. He woke up 30 minutes after they left, and I brought him into the kitchen, and I placed him in his high chair as I prepared his bottle. Suddenly, I heard my mom yelling angrily from somewhere in the house, "Angelia, come here now!" I yelled back, "Just a second, I'm in the middle of making a baby bottle." Again, I heard my mom call out, "Angela, come here now!" But now it sounded like she was somewhere else in the house. My mom, she wasn't even supposed to be at home. Frustrated and confused, I yelled back, "What's going on? 1 second!" I picked up my nephew and went into the master bedroom, and I walked into an empty room. I looked around and my mother was nowhere in the bedroom. I looked in the nursery, and that was empty as well. I looked throughout the rest of the house, guest bedroom, bathroom, the garage, and eventually checked the driveway for cars, only seeing my own car. I came back inside, grabbed my phone, and called my mom. I asked her if she had come back or had forgotten something, and my mom had answered confused. "No, why?" she asked me. To which I responded, "I just heard you a moment ago. You sounded upset." She responded, "I don't know what you're talking about. We've been on the road for over 30 minutes now." My stomach immediately sank. Once again, I didn't want to ruin their evening and just told her it might have been the television. After I hung up, the doorbell rang. I paused for a moment and decided to look out the peephole. No one was outside. I opened the door to peek out to see if there were any cars in the driveway, and it was still just my car. No one was visibly outside, and from where the house was located, you could clearly see the street in both directions. I never mentioned any of this to my sister until she was getting ready to move. As I was helping her pack, I noticed she had moved my nephew's crib into the master bedroom. I asked her why she had moved it, and what she told me was completely unexpected. She said around Halloween she had bought a black light. Just needing a random outlet to try it with, she plugged it into the nursery room. The room instantly lit up with what she described as a huge, concentrated stain in the middle of the room with handprints going up the walls. She immediately just felt very uncomfortable and moved the crib into her bedroom that very night. I told her what had happened the first time I watched my nephew, and she opened up about the strange things that happened in the house, and that was the main reason she was moving. She had heard strange voices in the house as well, including her own voice. She said the landlord offered to lower the rent if they signed a year lease. She said the landlord told her he was having issues keeping tenants in the rental, and her family was the one who had stayed the longest. She refused the offer and moved. I always wondered if anything happened in that home, and I do wish I had investigated the history. I absolutely hate that whatever was in that home mimicked our voices. My wife and I were living in a house in the country in the state of Alabama. We never considered the house to be haunted. One night, however, something came to call. It really was the proverbial dark and stormy night. We had learned that in the colder months, you could cut down heat loss through the windows by wrapping plastic sheeting around the screens. As we learned that night, putting the plastic on the screens outside made it vulnerable to winds. The wind was blowing very hard in gusts from all directions, was causing the plastic to flap against the screens. The trees were swaying back and forth outside, causing shadows to move about the room. I was sleeping very fitfully. The sounds and the light variations had me edgy and kept entering my dreams as nightmares. I dreamt of someone standing over the bed and woke to see the light show and hear the noise, and it was hard to separate the dream from reality. I had several nightmares in succession, but eventually drifted off to an uneasy sleep. At one point in the night, I woke to the distinct feeling that something was hovering over my head. I opened my eyes and looked up into what can only be described as a green mist. It was a bit like being inside a tent with the walls glowing from the light outside. There was something descending from the mist, extended towards my head like tentacles. As I looked up into the thing, I said, rather calmly under the circumstances, "What the hell is that?" My wife rolled over, took one look, and screamed. She got out of bed, crashed out of the room, leaving me alone with this green thing. At this point, the image seemed to be fading, and then it was gone. In a few minutes, my wife came back, rather sheepishly, and soon she was rolling over and going back to sleep as though nothing had happened. I, on the other hand, wanted some answers. "Did you see it too?" I asked. "Yes," she mumbled. "What was it?" I asked her. "I don't know," she replied, "but it was green." That was enough to tell me that she really had seen the same thing. The next day, when she was more chatty, I got her to describe the shape, and it was identical to what I saw. She said it was a domed-shaped object and had tentacles that seemed to reach down to my head. Is it possible that in my fitful sleep, I managed to generate something? At the time, and for years afterwards, I thought of the green thing as some evil thing trying to attack me. But I suppose it's possible I created it from my nightmares. My friend and I really loved the paranormal, and there was one specific trip we took together to stay in a haunted hotel in Gettysburg, hoping to have an experience. Our hotel room was decorated in ornate 19th century decor. The whole suite was very pink and overwhelming. The bathroom was modernized, but still had a few of the same decorative touches. The most unique item in the bathroom, right inside the door, was a baby cradle, complete with a pale pink ruffled blanket and a creepy porcelain doll. After exploring our room, we read the entries in the guest book on the table in our suite. I know we were risking the power of suggestion, but we were super curious about what other guests had to say. These previous guests noted their paranormal experiences and impressions, and we quickly debunked a few of the spooky encounters. One of the experiences listed was the smell of cigarettes in the room. We found that our room was just above the service entrance to the hotel. It was too easy to assume the workers may step out to smoke and hang out near the door, and the cigarette odor could travel into the hotel suite. All logic aside, when it came time to go to bed that night, my friend refused to turn out the lights. We've been through this before. I had brought a sleep mask with me. As I slept that night, I could hear a constant thumping, similar to a water pipe trying to heat up. This noise would stop and then start again. It wasn't enough to keep me awake. However, my friend, judging by his tossing and turning, was restless most of the night. The next morning, I woke up to find my friend watching TV. I greeted him with a "good morning, that wasn't so scary." He replied that I had slept through most of it. Turns out that thumping was the baby cradle in the bathroom. It would start rocking and it would bump into the wall. And my friend kept having to get up and make it stop moving. He finally gave up and let it go. The noises finally stopped on their own at dawn. Needless to say, my shower that morning was a quick one, with the door open. Last year, I was walking to my friend's house at a very late hour. My friend happens to live a block past an abandoned morgue. I passed by the morgue to find my friend sitting on its old concrete steps. He seemed distracted, as if listening carefully. I asked him what he was doing there, and he shushed me that noises were coming from inside the building, which was extremely disturbing for an abandoned place where there were not supposed to be any people at all. We heard things being moved and dragged all over the morgue. Then, unexpected knocks and scratching. We braved investigating and peeked into some of the windows and saw chairs and a desk moving around in an otherwise empty room. The two of us felt extremely uneasy and backed away from the windows and into the dark lawn. We stood there in silence, not quite knowing what to do with our thoughts. Movement caught my eye, and I glanced at a darkened window. There was a girl there staring back at me. She was pale, with an emotionless expression, and she had pure black eyes, and her nose was missing. She stood there for a solid 3 seconds before she vanished into thin air. I promptly turned and walked away towards my friend's house, tears threatening to run down my face. My friend followed me and asked me what was wrong, and I told him. He had not seen the girl. I can't walk past that morgue after this experience. And still, to this day, I avoid walking that way, even in the daylight. I have never been so terrified in my life, and it all has completely changed how I think about the paranormal. This story was submitted by Jennifer. If you'd like to share your own personal story, email me at speaknow@italktoghosts.com. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your story. When I started the 4th grade, my parents had a house built way out in the country in Michigan. Fields and fields of farmland had been sold, and contractors began developing them into subdivisions. We lived in the middle of the block in one of these neighborhoods, and there were houses as far as you can see in any direction. My ghost story didn't begin until several years later. When I was about 13, I began having a reoccurring dream. I wasn't an active participant in this dream. It was as if I watched it play out from above. In this dream, I was aware I was looking down upon a great farm. Miles and miles of corn surrounded a somewhat normal-looking farmhouse in the center of a field. A small blonde boy, in overalls, barefooted, would run off the porch of this farmhouse. His mother would be yelling for him to be careful and to come back for supper. There was always a dog barking in the distance. This young boy, maybe between the ages of 5 and 7 years old, would run through the corn looking to find his father, who was plowing the field. The corn was so tall, and the boy was so small. The boy knew where his father was from the sounds of the tractor. However, the father didn't know that the young boy was out in the cornfield. In a flash, there was an accident. In my dream, I would witness the father screaming and crying and holding his boy in his arms. In my dream, the father dug a small grave in the cornfield and buried his son. He continued to tend to the field until it became dusk and ended his day. Returning home, the mother questioned the father of where their son was. The father lied and tells her he hasn't seen him all day. And then I would wake up. I would have this dream weekly, so frequently that I felt like I was going crazy. So one morning, I decided to tell this elaborate and reoccurring story to my own mom. As I told her the details of this horrible dream, she became wide-eyed. She said to me that she had had that very same dream just the night before. Apart from the dream, we didn't notice anything odd at this new home. We had lived there for several years, so I just thought the dream thing was weird. My mother was a nurse and worked nights at the hospital. She would sleep in the morning, get up and iron her uniform for work, make dinner for us, and leave around 8 p.m. Now, as time went on, we did notice things in the autumn months of the year. One day, when getting ready to iron her uniform, she walked through our dining room to get the ironing board from the front hall closet. She turned the light on when she walked through. When she returned, the light was off. She flipped the switch again, thinking maybe she was just tired and thought she turned the light on. She set up the ironing board and went to get the iron, came back, and the light was off again. This time, she said out loud, "Enough with the tricks already. I'm not in the mood." While she stood in the dining room, ironing her uniform, she said she could feel the smallest little tug on her shirt, as if a small child was trying to get her attention. But when she looked down, no one was there. Fast forward to the next autumn. I was 14 and wanted a waterbed badly. My parents agreed, but I wasn't going to be able to put it upstairs where my bedroom was. If I was going to have a waterbed, my room would need to be in the basement. I was okay with this. The basement wasn't scary. We had just built this house, so it was open and clean. So I moved my room and got my waterbed. That same year, we adopted a puppy, and I would bring him downstairs to be with me to play and hang out. One day, while cleaning my room, she started to growl, then bark, and then a deep, angry growl. I turned to look at her, and she was staring at the basement wall. Her fur was standing on end, and she was crouching really low, like she was definitely afraid of whatever was there. I called her name, and she finally stopped and came over to where I was. The next year, we adopted a cat. One autumn day, I was 15 in high school, and I always had a ton of homework. I was sitting at the desk with the desk lamp on, and as the hours went on, it became dark in the house. The room I was in was beside the main entry, and our staircase was behind me. As I was working, I began to hear my cat growling and hissing, as if the dog was bothering him. I didn't think anything of this, but as it continued, I decided to turn around and tell them to knock it off already. I gasped. As soon as I turned around, I could clearly see a little boy in overalls sitting on our stairs. He had his elbows on his knees and his chin in his hands, watching me. The cat was not hissing at the dog. He was hissing at the boy. I turned around, scared out of my mind. I was shaking. I sat there for what seemed to be an eternity until I could hear my parents and brother come home, turning lights on as they walked through. I was relieved, but still almost sick from the shock of it. I jumped up and had to tell my parents what happened. My mother, who had experiences, was very comforting. My father, he was the doubtful one. He would often dismiss us and say, "You're just making this up." One night, while on shift at the hospital, my mother met a lady and they sat and had coffee. Since it was almost Halloween, they began to exchange ghost stories. My mother began to tell this lady all the things that happened in our home. She patted my mom's hand and said, "I know who that little boy is. He visits all the homes in that area looking for his family." Bingo. It all made sense. The little boy we dreamt about was the little boy trying to find his family. This lady said that he only makes contact with people who are sensitive. I've always wanted to do some research to see if I could find that young boy and to find out his name. Listen to I Talk to Ghosts for an atmospheric chill and to never feel alone, knowing the spirits are always around you. The autumn months are the perfect time to share and recommend this podcast to your ghoulish friends. Thank you for supporting the podcast and sharing the spooky. And with that, dear listener, we've reached the end of this episode of I Talk to Ghosts. I hope you've enjoyed the ghost stories that I shared with you this evening. Do you have a similar experience? Of course, I would love to hear about it, so please reach out. In the meantime, wherever you wander off to in this world or the next, just remember, come back and visit with me. Have a lovely, spooky evening, and good night.